Hi, welcome everybody. This is Vanessa Childs. I'm Senior Vice President of Cision Product Marketing, and I'm joined today by Val Lopez, who is our Vice President of Media Research. And we're going to be presenting today's webinar titled Driving Placements with Targeted Media Outreach. So just to give you a little background, Val heads up our media research team here at Cision. And really what the media research team does is they work directly with journalists and other key influencers in terms of how they like to best be pitched, the best time to talk to them, how to work with PR and corporate communications professionals. So she has a great background in her experience with the media. And then we also have a background in actually handling PR and marketing for our own organizations. So today's webinar is really going to give you some tips and tricks and pointers. I would say that sometimes people at the beginning of the webinar say, well, some of this is kind of common sense or the basics. So this is what the webinar will be focused on, is some of the basics and tips and tricks in dealing with both social and traditional media. There will be a copy of the presentation and slides for you if you have to cut out early. You will receive an email with that after today's webinar. And we'd like it to be interactive. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat box and go ahead and chat us. Now we've got several hundred people on today's webinar, so we might not be able to get through all the questions, but we'll certainly try to address them as we go throughout the webinar and leave some time at the end as well. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Vanessa. So like Vanessa said, some of this may be common sense and it could be PR 101, but being in the media research department and talking to journalists day in and day out, we get we hear the 5 biggest mistakes commonly from journalists, and it's listed on this slide. So sending irrelevant pitches. This is where you're not sending targeted pitches. I get this all the time. I'm listed in the database as covering social media and beauty and food. Well, it's kind of random. I get a lot of political content, technology content, and content that's not relevant to me. So I think it just really drives home to do your homework and know what they cover. While it seems simple, that's the biggest complaint that we get. And that's really what sets the tone for your relationship with a journalist when you're not doing that common sense homework.
Yeah, and I think nowadays with the access to all the information that we have on influencers and journalists, I mean, there is the pitching tips that you'll access in your Bugasch or Cision application that tells you, their pet peeves and all that good stuff. But there's a lot of homework you can do on an influencer, obviously, before you make your pitch, which we'll talk a little bit about that. But with the access to social tools, you can see what they're tweeting about. You can see what they're blogging about. So there really is little excuse nowadays to not understand your audience before you pitch to them, so that you shouldn't be sending these blind pitches out. And I think as we continue to get more access to information, what do they write about? What are they doing in social channels? The expectation is that you're doing your homework before you reach out. So maybe before you had a list of 2,000 people that you were targeting and you were proud that you were sending an email out to 2,000, you need to think about it in a different way of, okay, there's 20 people I want to go out and establish really good relationships with and build upon.
And I think 2 and 3 go hand in hand, outdated lists. If you're not using a platform or database like Cision or Bugasch where you can save a list within the platform and it'll automatically update, and you have a saved list on your desktop, those will just go out of date immediately. Journalists move, jobs, positions, topic coverage, that changes daily, at least from what we've seen through media research. So really update your list, and also know when someone opts out to remove them from that list. That is probably the biggest complaint. It's when a journalist will ask you nicely to be removed from the list, and they're getting bombarded with the same email from the same company, and that just results in being added to their own blacklist.
Yeah, so the advantage to using email distribution, if you're going to email people directly with your pitches, and there are a lot of journalists and influencers that Val would say want to be contacted via email. I mean, that is their preferred contact method. So it's great that you're using email to reach out to them. But if you're not using it within the application itself, and maybe you're pulling a list and putting it into Excel and then sending it via Outlook and mail merging or customizing it, you're BCCing, In that case, they really are looking, the applications always have an opt-out, but with those they're looking for you to honor as well, that you want to add something at the bottom, like to opt out of this, just hit reply with unsubscribe, or add something in there to really enable them to opt out. You'd be surprised how many journalists really take that to heart. They don't want to just blanketly be removed from the database. There are relevant pitches. They want to deal with PR professionals on a regular basis. But if people consistently are ignoring their opt-out requests, then they have no choice. They often will call and say, listen, I've got to change my email address or be removed. I think we all like to work with Excel spreadsheets. You'll take a list, you'll put it in Excel, you'll be working with that, you'll be developing relationships. But it's always a good idea to go and rerun that list the next time you do a pitch, because to Val's point, we're making more than 20,000 updates on average to the database every day. So chances are somebody new has shown up in the landscape, somebody's moved on, somebody's changed their name, and the last thing you want to do is have that outdated information.
Right, and being overly persistent, we interview journalists all the time, and while they don't mind following up immediately after you've sent an email or called them, probably not the best thing to do. So while these seem like common sense, they're still happening. Bad PR is still happening, and it's unfortunately ruining it for those who are taking the time to target and customize and do their homework. And we'll get into that a bit later. But that does result in, unfortunately, us having to remove contacts from the database when bad PR is happening.
Yeah, we had a question come in from Colleen who asked, how often do we update the media contacts, and is there a way that she can update it herself? So there is an email address that's available within the application, or a form you can hit. Anytime you find something that seems outdated to you, or you've got different information, or you've gotten a bounce back, that goes straight to Val's research team, and they follow up on those within 24 hours, Val. So that's the best way to say, I've got this bounce back, or I've heard this. And while we make a lot of outreach to contacts directly, we have a lot of automated methods that we're doing to find new contacts. One of the ways that really helps us keep current, up to date, is from our customers. So we always appreciate when you share that feedback.
There's another question we just received. Is there any value at all in sending a press release to an info@ address that's listed in a Cision or Bugasch profile? While I think the industry has changed, and you should send emails to the actual journalist, a lot of publications or outlets do use that, and they do have someone like an editorial assistant or someone flagging that inbox. So I think it's still relevant to send it to press releases, and then maybe customize a pitch to direct contacts.
And then Rhodey asked, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, how can you see who opts out? So if you're using the application and you send a distribution out in the application, there are analytics and metrics that you can look at after the fact. And I like these because it does help me kind of grade my pitches. So you can see both who's opened an email and who's opted out. Now, I think what people don't like then is when you follow up and say, well, why did you opt out of my press release? I mean, at that point, you might be harassing them a little bit. But it is interesting to see, like, okay, well, maybe my pitch wasn't targeted. I thought I had the right beat for this person, but perhaps it really wasn't relevant information. The nice thing, too, is when somebody opts out of our database, I get this question a lot. Are they opting out of the entire database for all the other clients? And that's not the case. So if you're using our application and you opt out, they're opting out for that particular customer or client. They're not just saying, hey, I don't want to ever hear from anybody again.
Great. And then Vanessa touched upon the whole idea of spray and pray, or the shotgun method. I think a lot of us are under pressure as PR professionals and communication professionals to really just get hits, to get coverage, and the easiest thing to do may be to spray and pray. While you may maybe get hits, get things that stick, it will just burn bridges with the people that don't want that email. And it's pretty obvious when it is a blast, especially if you use a mail merge type of form. You'll see a lot of times I've had emails come in where the name didn't update right, or the subject line says insert subject here. So right there, it makes me laugh, but it does happen, and it's just the first thing that will go into a journalist's spam box. So if you do a blast, really try and whittle your list down to a list of people who target that topic, And even think about location and the type of media type, if it's a magazine or newspaper or broadcast. So, so spray and pray, not the method to go. It just labels you as being lazy and not doing your homework.
So Matthew had a good question, and I think this is a little subjective, but Val, I'd love to get your feedback on it because I know people pitch you stories. When pitching a story idea, is it better to send the idea or give them a preview of the actual story?
What is your take on that?
Well, I think one of the things you don't want to do, obviously, is ever pitch an exclusive to multiple people. So that's the number one pet peeve that comes out right off the bat. But when pitching a story idea, I think you want to be as concise as possible sometimes, but maybe give them access to additional information. So we've had tools in the past that maybe you provide. One of the things that you'll see all over our databases when one of the journalists' pet peeves is when you send attachments. They're getting something from an unknown person, and it has an attachment, and it's either not going to get through their spam filters, or they're just not going to open an attachment from somebody they've never met before. So while it's tempting to then put your whole story, your sample story in as an attachment, the reality is that might not get read. So a lot of times, if you're pitching something, maybe a press release or an article, providing links to additional information to dig into is really useful. Like if you want to attach some photos, link out to those photos in the newsroom. Or if you've got additional background information that's stored somewhere on a website or in a newsroom, make it easy for them to get to that information, but try to keep the pitch somewhat concise.
Yeah, and that brings us to the slide, creating the perfect pitch. And honestly, you should just read some of the pitching tips that we list for journalists and the different direct quotes. It can change from person to person. While some will just want an idea and bullet points, some actually want the full press release. It just depends, and that's where you really have to look into what that journalist wants. And that's why we try and collect as many direct quotes as we can for each journalist, because it can change. But typically, like Vanessa said, keep it brief, maybe include certain things that might help them get more information on that, maybe links to a website, images, and stuff like that. So let's go back into creating the perfect pitch. Again, obvious stuff, know what they cover, and know their audience.
One of the things I love when I get pitched, and you as well, we are responsible for content on the Cision blog, is when somebody starts out with, I read this article that you wrote about blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that they've read a bunch of people's articles, but it tells me that they've done a little homework. They went out there, they read me, they got my tone of the article or tone of the blog before they're even pitching to me. So it's just demonstrating that they've done some homework that it even makes me will continue to read on in the pitch.
And also by knowing their audience, help them do their job. They're always looking for content, and if you can add into your pitch an angle for their audience specifically, that will just help them get an idea of how to cover the story. But on top of that, know what they don't cover. A perfect example is, let's say you are trying to promote a organic diet pill, and you pitch it to this personal health blog. But what you don't know, and because you didn't do the homework, they've covered several stories on why they hate diet pills. Just look at stuff like that and know what they don't cover, and it'll just save you time down the road. As I mentioned, keep it brief. A lot of the journalists we talk to and bloggers want it in bullet points, like I mentioned. Have it be summed up in the subject line too. I think subject line is marketing 101, where the first step is having them open the email, and I think it starts with the subject line. Stay relevant. See if you can have a local angle to a story. If you are pitching a product and it's national and you're targeting Chicago bloggers, see how it relates to that Chicago audience. And then personalize, Vanessa touched upon that. Just know what they've covered. Have them feel like you've done your homework and really get their work. And again, it goes back to updating your list. Make sure that you are using an updated list, are using a list where you've removed the opt-outs. And that's really one of the first things to do for creating the perfect pitch. But what's not listed on this slide, and I think is helpful, know when to pitch. Think about air times for shows. Look at tweets. Maybe they've tweeted something personal in nature that It's just not something that you should pitch them right now. There's a death in the family, or something happened, or a big news is happening that will trump your pitch. Think about that. And again, Vanessa touched upon this. Make sure there's a way to opt out. Always includes a way to opt out in emails.
So Krishna had a good question, which was, should we be doing our homework on each editor we send a press release to and making each pitch personal? I realize you have a busy job in itself, and to try to personalize each pitch is difficult, but I do believe that if you spend more time personalizing a pitch for a smaller number of people, you'll probably get the same, if not better, results. You could probably spray and pray and send a non-personalized pitch to 2,000 people on a list and maybe get the same amount of coverage that you did for those 20 people that you did personalized, and it'd be easier for you to blast the 2,000. The difficulty becomes then you don't have an established relationship for the next time. All of a sudden people have opted out of your list and don't want your next pitch. So while in the short term the results might be equal, personalizing can really pay off in the long run. The other thing I would mention is that Val was talking about stuff that's personal. One of the things you'll see in the database, and we've really enhanced our profiles with this, is some of the biographical information. And sometimes you think that's silly, but if you went to the same school as somebody and you have a common bond there, so we talk about what their work history is, if we know where they went to school, any type of biographical stuff, we also try to provide that in our database just to kind of give you, to be honest, a competitive edge. You're competing against other professionals who are trying to get their story out there. And so that's really what the database is designed to do, is to help give you as much insight and intelligence so that you can personalize your pitch.
I mean, ultimately, they just want to feel a connection. So, like Vanessa said, we have bio information. We include books written. Maybe check out their book and let them know that you've read their book, and maybe it relates to your pitch. So really, really, really personalize and customize. And when I get those, I want to help them as much as I can. So I've oftentimes, where I can't cover it, I'll pass it along to someone who I think it'll be a better fit for.
Yeah. Shelby has another good question, one that we've really kind of toyed with product-wise, which is, how do these recommendations change, if at all, when you're sending over the wire? And so I think that when you're putting a press release on the wire, you're writing it in a very different format than when you're pitching to somebody. So yes, you could just, we used to have a tool that would just say, take the press release and then email it out to all these journalists, and you didn't tweak the press release at all. And I think more and more people are tired of just getting those same old email, or press release emails. They can read a press release off the wire, and they probably have Google alerts set up to pick up press releases that are on their industry or their topic. So that when you are then emailing them direct, I think they're looking for a little bit more than just a copy of the press release. And that's really where you then have to get much more creative in your pitches and do your homework.
All right. Finding the right influencers. So I think this comes down to really narrowing your search down. And it could be topical, it could be location, and it could be media type. So like this slide says, if you're looking to promote nail polish, maybe not send it to every beauty editor or contact we list or that you have listed in your own database or file. Try and find those that specifically cover nail polish. While it won't be their coverage every day, look for past articles. And also what's great with influencers, it can be anyone, and it could be bloggers, and we list several thousand, tens of thousands of blogs, and you really get to see how niche they cover. I think a fourth of our bloggers cover top topics, while the rest cover niche topics. So you can really find an audience for just about anything.
Yeah, I think I've fallen victim to this before, though, which is I'll go to run a list of people I want to target, and if my result set is like 15 people, I'll start to widen my search. I start to panic and go, well, 15 isn't enough. I need to find more, instead of kind of looking at those 15 people off the bat. And then I also start to panic if I don't have these big top-tier publications, like, oh my gosh, I need to be pitching to these. When in reality, sometimes these smaller niche publications are the ones that are going to be interested in your story and pick up your story. So it's not always quantity. I mean, we throw numbers out at Cision all the time. We'll say we have 1.6 million influencers and outlets and contacts. And numbers are great. I mean, obviously, the more access you have to different types of niche audiences, the better. But you don't want to get caught up in just the numbers. And you want to get caught up in the quality of the contacts and if you're pitching to 15 versus you're pitching to 1,500, you may get better results with the 15, which I guess I've just stolen your next slide.
Good, perfect transition. I think it's great. While, I always like to use bacon in my webinars. I love bacon. So let's say I'm trying to promote bacon candy or a bacon scented pen. And while that's a novelty product, most likely a lot of mainstream, well, no, they won't. But let's say New York Times covers it. That audience, while they'll read it, that's all they'll do, or they'll just glance over it. Where if you have or find a blog or publication that specifically covers bacon or candy or something that's more niche, that audience, they'll most likely do action around that, meaning they'll visit your website, they'll actually buy the product, they actually are interested in that. So think about that when, if it's you trying to pick top tier and that's your main goal, think about those smaller audiences and find the right community. And so I think the first step is knowing where that community is. Is it on Twitter? Is it forums? Is it on a blog? Just know where the community is at and just start talking to them, or at least listen to them first, and you'll start to see who the influencers are. They're the ones who are the most vocal, who create content, and who share content.
So Val loves to talk about bacon, and I love to talk about the Kardashians. I sadly am obsessed with the Kardashians, and I'm not even embarrassed to say it anymore. But Kim Kardashian has a huge Twitter following. And so, one of the things you always think is, gosh, if I could get Kim Kardashian to tweet something about my product, how great is that? I've got this huge following. But you have to think about who Kim's audience is, right? So Kim's audience might be 16 to 25-year-old women plus Vanessa, who's not anywhere near 25. And so, yes, if you're pitching a product, perhaps, a new lipstick, then you're targeting 16 to 25-year-olds. Kim Kardashian is the right audience, or she's got the right audience that she's attracting. But the reality is, if you're pitching perhaps, a B2B product, Kim Kardashian tweeting about it really isn't going to get you much there. So it really is about uncovering the influencer and then that influencer's audience. And so you'll begin to see within the database that we're going to continue to add social demographics and metrics and followers so that you can begin to understand not only that influencer, but that influencer's network around them so that you can begin to really target, which is, I guess, leading to your next slide, the mass influencers.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape has changed, as we all know, especially with digital media and social media and the ability to get news whenever we want. I mean, when I commute to work, I think every single person is reading the news on their phone. I maybe can count on one hand in the past month that I've seen the number of people with actual newspaper or magazine. So they want news immediately and customized to them. And so we're seeing the change in influencers and how they're changing PR. They're not tied to traditional media. And actually now what we're seeing in the database and just from research, a lot of traditional journalists are either blogging in addition to what they do, or they're leaving traditional media and starting their own venture online. So I think it's just something to really consider. While you shouldn't leave traditional PR to the side and just focus everything on social media. That's actually the next slide. Just consider how news is consumed differently, but it all comes down to relationships, and that'll never change, and how you need to build that relationship. And I think the big one that really helps, and that what I've seen personally, it's social karma. So have your ears open and see and try and help journalists. If they're looking for sources or for something that's not relevant to maybe your client, just help them out. Just be there for them. So when you do want to pitch them, they'll remember that and they'll want to help you out.
Yeah, I mean, definitely over the years, the expectations when a journalist does then respond to your pitch, or they reach out to you maybe through Help a Reporter Out, which is another tool that we offer, is the timeliness of response, because they're working on a deadline that's different than the traditional newspapers and magazines. I mean, when Val posts these deadlines for people for blogs, it's real time. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to go with what I have, and then if you follow up with me afterwards, I might update my story, and then that's too late. It's like you've already gotten into the quote after the story's already been generated. So this notion of real time and real response is becoming increasingly more important, although I always think, journalists expect that when they call you that they're going to get a timely response.
And then this brings us to our last slide, and then we can take a few questions after. Social media outreach. I just mentioned, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You really need to know the fundamentals of social media. And that also doesn't mean that you have to be on every platform. Think about where your audience is at or who you want to reach, and study up on that platform and find a way to be efficient and effective on those platforms. Building relationships take time. You can't do spray and pray with social media. You really have to find those influencers and get to know them. And while we're starting to see a shift with more journalists being open to getting pitches through Twitter, not a lot of them are open to that yet. So just know that. And actually there's this great quote, in one of our tip sheets we have a quote from Brian Stelter of the New York Times. And he said, Twitter and Facebook isn't the way to pitch a story. It's the way to get in our heads. It's the way to know who we are, know what we're thinking about, and know what we don't like. So it's just a way to do your homework and build that relationship and share his content and tweet what he's sharing and engage with his followers. So I think that's a great way to start on Twitter. And Facebook typically isn't the place to pitch from what I've researched.
So one of the things that Val can tell you has really changed over the years is when we first put contacts in the database, the Cision and Bugasch database, it was all about getting their email address, their fax number at the time. Although there are still people who like to be contacted via fax.
A lot of broadcast people do, surprisingly.
And so their email address, their fax, and their phone number. And now we've begun to track social handles, right? So one of the things you want to know is, okay, well, I'm looking up this journalist in the database. Do they have a Twitter page? We were just actually joking before the call started. I just got married, so I have a new last name. And so it's Vanessa Childs, and I'm sure there's other Vanessa Childs out there. And so the same thing happens with journalists, right? You're trying to find the right one and the right Twitter handle, and not their personal one, but what's their one that's appropriate for their blog or their business or their publication. And so we've spent a lot of time updating social handles in our database. So that's really another avenue that you can use if you have access to the database. We have how many handles now, Val?
Wow, like 160,000?
So over 160,000 handles, and not just Twitter, right? So
right.
Some people, they're all over Instagram, and some they're on Pinterest, and some they're on LinkedIn, and I don't know about Google. Google's another one that they're out there.
People who are still diehard Google Plus fans.
So it's no longer just about, hey, let me give you their email address. It's, hey, let me give you some of their social properties so that you can go do some of that homework that Val just mentioned.
Well, and I think to tie into that, because they are on social and they are on Twitter, everywhere, things can go viral in an instant. So think about that before getting in a tiff with a journalist or a blogger. If you don't like their response to your email, just let it go. I've seen numerous times where an email got retweeted, sent to other blogger networks, and it's just not good, and it ends up leading to a Twitter war and just you apologizing in the end. So just know that things can go viral in an instant, and remember, honesty is the best policy. If you want to engage with a blogger or a journalist through social media, be upfront with who you are and who you're with, and that's where updating your bio information, your Twitter page, Facebook page, LinkedIn. So I think we all do this when we get an email from someone, or we're trying to. If we've heard someone's name, we'll Google them and we'll want to know more information about them. So a lot of times we'll go to a LinkedIn page or read a Twitter bio. So get that information filled out, and I think that's a great first step in social media outreach. So we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so we've got some good questions out there I'd like to grab. So Shelby asked, if personalization and considering the little guys, when should you mass pitch via the wire? Is that outdated now? And I think it goes back to what Val said about all journalists have different styles. There's no one size fits all. So the personalized pitch to the little guys is great. But I find too that when I still put press releases out on the wire, that there are journalists in my industry that follow my company, on different, through the wire or through PR Web that they're subscribing to. And so they might reach out to me that way. Like they've picked up the news story and then do some outreach because they've seen it as a press release. So I never want to say that there's one specific channel or that the press release is dead or you should be doing everything through social or you shouldn't do email. Sometimes it is a combination, and so I think there were a couple of questions about like, am I hitting people in too many different ways? So somebody else had a question that they send releases through their Vocus system, but then they send a separate email to the social media list. Are you duplicating efforts? And I guess it's going to depend on if those are the same contacts that are also on your Vocus list. Then yes, you would be, but you may be pitching, and then this was another question that somebody had, is it inappropriate to pitch to 2 different people within an organization? And again, it's going to depend on what they cover. If it's a large organization and there's 2 people dedicated to a sports topic, and that's both their niche, I don't think that's inappropriate.
Yeah, and journalists have said that they're open to getting at the same outlet, getting pitches from the same person, but just know that they're getting the same pitch and they talk to each other. So just really customize your email knowing that.
Annie had a question, and I actually don't know the answer to this one. I have an idea, and Val, I don't know if you do as well. She says she sometimes gets opt-out notices from journalists who aren't on her list. How does that happen? And I don't know if that's an auto-forward, that maybe somebody left the organization and is auto-forwarding it on to somebody else who is then opting out. That would be my guess on what's happening there. But again, you could send those to us, like, I've gotten this person and they weren't on my list, and we might be able to do a little digging and research on those.
So there was a poll question that was up. Sorry we didn't actually read that out loud. So if you're interested in having someone at Cision contact you about the database, please answer the poll.
Yeah, so we're assuming a lot of the people on the call already have access to the media database. But if you don't have access, and we've been talking about the Vocus database and the Cision database and how you can go pitch and use email, if you're sitting on this call and you're saying, that'd be great, but I actually don't have that, we can put you in touch with somebody that can show you what the power of that can do. So this isn't some kind of hard sales pitch, but at the end sometimes we get people on these calls that actually don't have the product that we're talking about and would like to better understand the product. So go ahead and click yes, and we can certainly talk to you about that. Or if there's just something else you want your Cision rep to follow up with you on, click yes on this, and we'll go ahead and have that done.
Great. Well, we're a minute over. Sorry, guys. We had a lot of great questions. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm sure we'll have more targeting webinars in the future. And I think we're going to send a copy of the slides out as well. So
thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Thank you.